What's up, everybody? Today we're going to take a look at the Arendal 1723 2V subwoofer. If you like humongous earth-shattering bass, this is the show for you. Before we get started, if you're into tech, hi-fi, or movies, be sure to push the subscribe button for new weekly videos. While we get this out of the box, let's cover the contents and the specifications. The contents are very straightforward. You have a pair of gloves, which are useful because the finish does pick up fingerprints pretty easily, a bunch of papers, a power cord, two grills, one for each of the speakers, and remember there are two drivers in this sub, and the sub itself. Arendal sells a total of 6 different subwoofers, 2 in the 1961 series and 4 in the 1723 series. This is the 1723 2V, which is the big boy for all of the subs that Arendal sells. The distinguishing characteristic for the subwoofer is that it sports two 13.8-inch drivers. Yes, so it's not a 12, it's not a 15, it falls kind of in the middle there. So it's quite unique to this brand. The other item is that this is a vented subwoofer. It is a bass reflex, not acoustic suspension, as opposed to the 2S version, which is a little bit smaller and is sealed only. Now, one thing that's very interesting is that there is a port plug included, so you can run this in both vented and sealed configurations. And there are special EQs for both of those. Actually, 6 different versions of EQ, 3 for sealed and 3 for vented. The subwoofer plate mounted to the rear of the enclosure is where all of the action takes place. Starting at the top, you'll find a really nice LCD panel that's controlled by a spinny knob and a menu and an enter button. This is where you make all of your configuration settings. However, I found it was much easier to use the app than the actual control panel. Moving down from there, you find a 12-volt trigger and a service input. At the bottom of the amp plate, you find both inputs and outputs for RCA and XLR. This allows you to grab bass information from a full range feed. Finally, you can see that the amp is rated at 1,200 watts RMS. The app is a really elegant way to manage your subwoofer. Everything that you need to do is going to be here. This mirrors all of the functionality from the rear LCD panel. When you open the app, it will automatically find your subwoofer and show it in the devices section. The section that you want to go to is the settings section. This is where all of the action is for the app. This allows you to set your levels, and you can give a 6 decibel input gain if you'd like. Crossover is set here, as well as selecting the different EQ. And as I said before, there are 6 of those. There's a parametric EQ, so if you want to adjust the sub here, you can. There's also a huge number of different turn-on options, everything from XLR to RCA to dual source to 12-volt trigger. Finally, the setup section has all of the other sundry settings that you might want to set for the sub. If you want to be more hands-on with the sub directly, you can use the LCD panel on the rear subwoofer plate. This has all of the settings that are included in the app directly on the unit itself. The LCD is really quite nice, it's beautiful, and the controls are intuitive. There are 2 buttons, one goes forward, one goes back, and then you spin things around to select. To get started with measurements, let's talk about the different EQs that are available. And like I said, there are 6 of them, and we're looking at the ported EQs now. So this means remove the plug from the port and run in ported mode. You can see that what happens is here at the top is port mode 1, then EQ2, and then port mode EQ3. And as you step through these, the roll off, the crossover, so to speak, the attenuation on the low end becomes more and more extreme. I really like the P1 EQ because this gives you all of that low end. I mean, look, at 10 hertz, you are way down when you use the P3, and that really kills a lot of fun of the subwoofer. But as you can see, using the P1 EQ, man, that is a lot, and it's almost flat. Now we'll look at the sealed EQs, and you'll see the same thing. Sealed 1, then Seal 2 has some attenuation on the low end, and then Seal 3 has more attenuation. However, you are very flat all the way down to 10 Hertz with these. Now let's compare the sealed versus ported EQs. This is exactly the same settings on the subwoofer, just different EQ settings. As you can see, the ported is 2 or 3 decibels more of output, all the way down to 11-ish Hertz, where the sealed does a little bit better. So I would say, for the most part, if you want the most performance out of the subwoofer, you would go ahead and use ported EQ1 with the port plug out. What we're looking at here are frequency sweeps using the P1 EQ setting with the port plug out. And you can see as I step this up 5 decibels per sweep, you get up to the point where, gosh, I guess at 10 Hertz, you're just shy of 102 decibels. That might be 101 and a half or so, 101.66 right there. And this is peaking out at about 108 decibels. Remember, this is at 9-foot distance from the subwoofer to the microphone, which is at my seating position. So this is, 3-ish meters. So it's quite a bit of distance there to be measuring. So this is a lot of output. Is super duper loud. You can see that this green line is where things get a little squirrely, right? So it looks like the subwoofer has some amount of built-in protection to keep itself from dying as you get too loud. So I'd say that the orange line represents the maximum output you're going to get out of this guy using P1 in ported mode. One thing I will say is that this did not sound like it was in distress at all. I thought it would keep going a little bit more, but it looks like it decides at this point that it's had enough and it needs to relax. From a sealed perspective, so with the port plug back in using the S1 EQ, you can see very similar kind of progression. Gets up to a point where the subwoofer starts compressing down here at 12.42 Hertz or so. So this green line is really representative of the maximum output you'll get before it starts to do things to protect itself down low. And finally, let's look at the maximum output with the ported, which is the top line, and sealed, which is the bottom line outputs before we got into that compression or potentially protection by the plate amp itself. You can see that you're getting 4 decibels-ish or so more output for most of that low end range, all the way down to 11, 12 Hertz through, gosh, all the way up here at 65 or so. So you will get more output with ported. However, it looks like the sealed is a little more linear, and man, that's, each of these bars right now is only 2 decibels. So, you've got swings of plus or minus 2 decibels, which is pretty darn good until you get to this room mode here and then over here. So this thing is super flat, super linear, and has a ton of output. The comparison that was made is that these two drivers are equivalent to the surface area and excursion of a 21-inch subwoofer. So that would explain why there's so much output coming from this guy. And this thing is absolutely a beast. It is a lot of output. Now let's jump into some demos. So this first is the intro to Edge of Tomorrow. This is a sub killer, but this sub handled it well. Next up, we've got the race scene from Ready Player One. This is one of the most played demo scenes ever, and a lot of people are familiar with it. And this subwoofer, again, performs extremely well.
First to the egg.
Now let's take a listen to the opening bass note from Blade Runner 2049. This is a fairly heavy sustained bass note that can break a lot of subs. And finally, we'll close out on a little bit of John Wick 3. It's time for the final thought. So, as you can see and hear, this subwoofer is an absolute beast, but you always have to compare price against performance and see if it's a ratio that works for you. At a retail cost of $3,000, the subwoofer isn't exactly inexpensive, but for the equivalent of a 21-inch powered subwoofer, that's a steal. This sub is exemplary. It does everything you need it to do in a home theater and more. I have absolutely zero hesitation endorsing this subwoofer and recommending it. If you need something for your theater to give it that oomph that it doesn't have, this is the one. All right, folks, thanks so much for watching. Remember, like and subscribe and share with your friends. Spread this thing far and wide because this is a sub that everybody needs to know about. See you guys in the next video.